Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session. So, my name is Sulaiman Adejumo, and today I'll be taking you through a very friendly introduction to building simple and clean front end projects using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So, before we begin, I want to make something very clear. This session is designed specifically for beginners, for anyone who feels like they are still building their foundation in front end development. So you do not need advanced experience. You don't need to be an expert. You definitely do not need to know everything before you can follow along. So if you know the basics, or even if you are just starting out, you will find this session valuable. So today, my focus is not just on writing complex code or building anything complicated. Instead, I want to show you a clean, simple way to structure your projects, because project structure is one of the biggest things that you can use to make your coding journey easier. And when your files are organized, when your code is separated correctly, and when you understand how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all work together, it makes everything becomes clearer. And updating your work becomes easier, fixing issues becomes easier, and even learning more advanced concepts becomes more enjoyable. So throughout this session, we'll walk through clear examples and simple explanations, and my goal is to help you see front-end development in a calm, organized way without any pressure or confusion. Right, so relax, take your time, and feel free to note down any ideas that you want to try out later. And right, with that in mind, let's get started. So what you will learn on this slide, I just want to give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover in this session. So having a clear picture of the journey ahead helps you to follow along more comfortably, especially if you are new to front-end development. So first, we'll start with something very important, which is how to organize your files. Many beginners jump straight into writing code without thinking about structure. And this is what leads to messy projects, confusion, and difficulty when things get bigger. So a clean project structure is one of the easiest ways to make your development experience smoother. So we'll spend a bit of time understanding that properly. And next, we'll look at how the three main tools, which are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all work together. Even though most people know these three names, many beginners don't fully understand how each one fits into the bigger picture. Right. So, and once you understand the role of each tool, everything starts to make more sense. Building project becomes more easier, as I've mentioned. And after that, we'll talk about how to write clean, beginner-friendly code. And this is not about perfection or advanced techniques. It is simply about writing code in a way that feels more organized, because making your code feels more organized, readable, and easy to understand. So a lot of new developers face challenges simply because their code grows too quickly and becomes hard to manage because they have overcomplicated things. So we'll look at simple habits you can use to avoid that. Also, we'll look at common mistakes that beginners make, because understanding this early will save you a lot of time and frustration. So you will learn what to avoid and why, and I will show you better alternatives that keep the projects clean and simple. And finally, by the end of the session, you will be able to start a small project with confidence. You will know how to structure it, how to keep your files clean, and how to put everything together in a way that feels comfortable. Right. So, and my goal for you is to finish this session feeling like you can actually build something without feeling overwhelmed. So, all right, and let's move into the first part, which is understanding why structure matters. So, good structure is honestly one of the biggest secrets in front-end development, and it is something many beginners overlook because they are excited about starting to code right away. But the truth is, your project structure is just as important as the code you write itself. So a simple way to understand this is to imagine your project as a room, just like the image showing up here. Think about what it feels like when you walk into a room that is scattered and messy, and you may know that something you need is in there, but because everything is all over the place, even finding one small item becomes stressful and time consuming. So you spend more energy trying to figure out where things are rather than actually doing what you came to do. So now picture the opposite, a tidy, organized room when everything has its place, when things are laid out neatly. You can walk in and immediately find whatever you need. So you feel calmer, more in control, and more productive. So that same experience applies to your code. A messy project with files all over the place or code mixed together makes the whole development process harder. So it slows you down. It makes fixing problems more stressful, and it can even discourage you from, keeping the project going. And when your project is clean and organized, everything becomes easier. You save time, you reduce frustration, and you can quickly understand what is happening, even weeks or months later when you try and go back to the code you've written before. So good structure also helps when you want to share your project with someone else, whether it's another developer, a classmate, or even your future self. So a tidy structure makes your work more readable and even more professional. So it shows that you are thinking like a developer and not just writing code randomly. And the main idea here is that structure is not about being perfect. It is about giving yourself a simpler, cleaner way to work. And as we go through this session, you will see how small changes in structure can completely change your experience when building front-end projects. All right, so let's look at three main building blocks that make up front-end projects. So every front-end project you will ever build relies on three main tools. Understanding these tools is the foundation of clean development. So these three tools are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and each one has a very specific job. So let's start with HTML. HTML gives your page its structure. Think of HTML as the skeleton, like a framework that holds everything in place. It tells the browser what elements exist on the page, such as headings, paragraph, buttons, images, and sections. On its own, HTML doesn't look stylish or exciting, but it is absolutely necessary because it forms the basic outline of your page. So next is CSS, which is what makes everything look attractive. So CSS controls the colors, the spacing, the layout, and the overall visual design of your page. So if the HTML is the skeleton, then think of CSS as the style and the personality. And it is what turns a plain basic layout into something clean and modern. So even simple CSS can transform how a project feels, and beginners are often surprised by how much difference small styling changes make, right? So, and then we have JavaScript, which adds actions and behavior. So JavaScript is what makes your page interactive. So it is responsible for things like clicking buttons, loading data, updating the screen, and adding any kind of movement or response. So if HTML is the structure, as I mentioned, CSS is the appearance, then JavaScript is the part that brings everything to life. It's like electricity running through a building, allowing it to do more than just sit there. So now a good developer knows exactly where each of these tools belongs. And the problem many beginners face is that they mix the roles together. without realizing it. They put styling inside the HTML, or they mix JavaScript into places where it doesn't belong, or they make everything too tangled. And this creates confusion and makes the project much harder to maintain down the line. And today, one of the goals is to help you keep those tools separate and clean. And once you learn to do that, you will see how much easier your projects become. So when each tool does its own job, your code becomes clearer, your debugging becomes simpler, and your confidence as a developer grows. So now that we understand the three building blocks, let's look at how to organize them properly inside a project folder. So this is one of the simplest and cleanest project folder structures that you can use. It is perfect for beginners. It might look very basic, but this layout is powerful because it keeps every part of your project in its correct place. Whether your folder looks like this, when it looks like this, you immediately know where everything is. And that clarity alone makes your whole project easier to work with. Right. So let me walk you through each part so you can clearly understand its purpose. So, right, the first file you see here is index.html. This is the main page of your website. It holds the structure and the basic content, with things like headings, sections, texts, placeholders for images or buttons. So anytime your browser loads your website, this is usually the first file it reads. So think of the index.html as the foundation of everything. So if this file is clear and simple, the rest of your project becomes easier to manage. So next we have the style.css. This controls the appearance of your website. This is where you decide how things look, including colors, spacings, fonts, and layouts. So one of the most important habits in front-end development is keeping all your styling inside the CSS file instead of mixing it into the HTML. So keeping your files in one dedicated place makes them much more easier to update later, especially when your project grows. And even professional developers stick to this habit because it keeps things clean and consistent. So there you have it. And now we have script.js. This is where your logic goes. So this file controls interactions, behaviors, and any dynamic part of your project. For example, you want to load the data. If you want to load the data, respond when someone clicks a button, or update the content on a page. So all this happens inside the script.js. And by keeping all your behavior in one file, you avoid cluttering your HTML and the logic becomes easier to follow as well. So finally, we have the images folder. So it might seem small, but this folder plays a big role in keeping your project neat, right? So instead of having pictures scattered all over the place, you store them in a folder in one place, basically. So this makes your folder clean. It also makes it easier to replace or update images later without searching through the entire project. So, and what's interesting about this is that even advanced developers, like I've mentioned, use this exact structure when they are building quick prototypes. And why? Because it works. So it's simply just the best way you can start your project. It's clean and it gives you a solid foundation to build on. You don't need complication or any complicated tools or extra folders when you are just starting out. So this layout is more than enough to help you stay organized, confident, and as you build your front-end projects. So now that we also understand folder layouts, let's look at how to keep the content inside each file clean and beginner friendly. So we're starting with the HTML. This should always be simple, even though it is the foundation of a web page. It doesn't need to be long or complicated to make it effective. So in fact, the best HTML is usually the kind that is short, clean, and very easy to read. A lot of beginners, would think that adding more tags, more divs, or more fancy elements make their work look more professional. But the opposite is actually the case. Clear and simple HTML is what makes your project structured and easy to work with. And one of the key habits in writing clean HTML is using clear class names. A class name should tell you what element is, and what the purpose is. Names like card, as you can see there, card, header, product, button, or container are easy to understand because they describe the role of the element. And you need to avoid random names or names that don't mean anything. So good names make your HTML readable, not just for you today, but for you in the future, or for anyone else who might be interested at taking a look at your projects, right? So another habit is avoiding too many nested divs. So beginners sometimes wrap everything inside multiple layers of divs because they're not sure what to use. And this creates something developers call the div soup. So div soup makes your HTML harder to read and harder to style because you end up with layers on top of layers that don't need to exist. So if you keep your structure shallow and clean, everything becomes much easier to manage. So this small example on the slide shows how short HTML can be. We have the div class card, the product name, and the short description. This is all you need to create a simple product card. One main character, one main container, which is a div. We have a heading, the product name, and we have a paragraph, the short description here. And what's great is that you can reuse this simple block again and again by just changing the content to whatever you choose to replace it with. So that is the power of a clean HTML. It gives you a structure that is easy to repeat, easy to style, and easy to expand. So many beginners try to overcomplicate their HTML because they think more code means better results. But clean HTML is usually short and clear. And if your HTML looks simple, you are doing something right. So the complexity of a project will grow naturally in other areas like styling or the functionality, but the structure should remain clean and easy to understand. So now we've seen how HTML should be. Now let's move on to styling and look at how CSS can enhance this structure without making things messy. So CSS should always stay in its own file. This is one of the most important habits to develop as a beginner because it keeps your projects clean and organized right from the start. It may seem tempting to write CSS directly inside your HTML, especially when you are in a hurry or experimenting. But that approach becomes messy very quickly. And when you place all your CSS in a separate file, which is usually called style.css, like the one shown earlier, you give your project a proper structure. And it becomes easier to find your styles, easier to make changes, and easier to understand how everything connects. So if you have everything open somewhere else, for example, you need to have someone else check out your project and found styles scattered everywhere. let's say you in the past you've had to like open someone else's project, you found styles scattered everywhere, you would understand how confusing that can be. So keeping CSS separate avoids that problem completely. And another thing to remember is that CSS does not need to be complicated. Many beginners feel the pressure to add shadows, add gradients, animations, and different colors everywhere, especially when they first start learning. So, but good styling often comes from simplicity. And that's the truth. So start with simple spacing and a few consistent colors and clean readable class names, then you're good. So this basically, I mean, these elements alone can make your project look really professional without overwhelming you, right? So for example, this simple CSS block with card, padding, background, and a border radius is enough to create a clean, modern looking card. Just a bit of padding for spacing, a white background for clarity, and a rounded border to soften the edges. So you do not need 20 different lines of CSS to make something look good. And as you grow and become more comfortable, you can add more styling, but starting with the simple choices, with simple choices will keep you focused and confident. Another habit that helps beginners is keeping class names consistent. If you choose names like card, button, header, or container, stick to that style throughout your project. And consistency in naming makes your CSS easier to maintain and reduces the confusion when you return to your projects later. And the main idea here is start simple, then grow. So clean CSS is not about doing more, it's about doing the essentials well. And once your foundation is strong, you can then expand your styles at your own pace without losing control. So now we've talked about the structure and styling. Now let's move into the next part of front-end development, which is adding behavior and interaction with JavaScript. Right, so JavaScript is the part of your project that adds behavior to whatever structure and styling you've written already. So if HTML gives you structure, CSS makes everything look good, and then JavaScript is what brings your project to life. That allows your page to respond when someone clicks a button, loads in information, opens a menu, interacts with anything on the screen. And one of the best habits you can build early on is keeping your JavaScript in a separate file as well, usually called the script.js. And just like we separate CSS from HTML to keep things clean, we also separate JavaScript to make the project more organized. And when the logic is in one place, it becomes easier to find and improve or fix your code when there's issues. So mixing JavaScript inside of your HTML can make things very confusing quickly, especially as your project grows. So now when starting out, the most important rule for JavaScript is this: keep things simple. Not just for JavaScript, as I've mentioned, for HTML, CSS, but for JavaScript especially, it is that much important. Keep things simple. You do not need complicated logic. You don't need advanced concepts. At the beginning, the best thing you can do is write small functions with simple names. For example, the function on the slide. This may look basic, but it teaches you the essential pattern, which is creating a function, giving it a clear name, and letting it handle one small job. So small functions are easier to understand, easier to test, and much easier to reuse in different parts of the projects. So when you organize your JavaScript into clear actions like this, you stay in control of your code. So a common challenge beginners face is that their JavaScript file becomes big like too quickly. They try to do everything inside one long block of code, and after sometimes it becomes overwhelming and hard to manage. So that is why starting light is so important. Keep your functions short, keep your naming simple, and only add more logic when you truly need it. Now, as you grow your project, your JavaScript will naturally become more advanced, but your foundation should remain clean and relaxed. The goal at this stage is not to impress anyone with complexity, but to build confidence in how JavaScript connects to your HTML and CSS. So now we've looked at how each tool fits into your project. Let's put everything together and see how they all connect inside the browser. So this simple diagram helps you understand how everything connects in a front-end project. So when you're just starting out, it's easy to feel overwhelmed because you hear about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but you aren't always sure how they all fit together. So this is where the simple analogy can make things much more clearer. So think of HTML as the walls of a house. The walls give the house its shape. They define the rooms and they create the basic structure. In the same way, HTML defines the structure of your web page. It tells the browser what exists on the page, whether it's a heading, a paragraph, or an image or a button. So without HTML, there's nothing for your page to actually stand on. So next we have the CSS. Think of this like a paint, like painting and decoration that makes the house looks nice. So this paint doesn't change the shape of the rooms, but it makes them more pleasant, more colorful, and more engaging. So CSS does the same thing to your web page. It controls the color, the spacing, the fonts, and the layout. And it's what takes the plain structure and turns it into something that feels polished and professional. And finally, we have JavaScript, which is like the electricity in the house. Electricity is what allows you to turn on the lights, open automatic doors, or power your appliances, and it adds function, movement, and interaction. So JavaScript plays that exact role in a web project. Lets your page respond when someone clicks a button, loads new data, shows or hides elements, or perform any kind of action. So once you understand this connection, building front-end projects becomes much more easier. So you no longer feel confused about where something should go. If it's structure, it belongs to HTML. If it's styling, that goes into CSS. And if it's behavior or actions, that is for JavaScript. So this understanding also helps you avoid mixing everything together, which is one of the common issues beginners face. And when each tool stays in its lane, your project becomes cleaner, more organized, and far less stressful to work with. So now that we understand how these three fits into the bigger picture, we'll look at how we can build simple, reusable components that make our project easier to scale. And before that, let's look into Fetch. So Fetch is one of the simplest and most useful tools in JavaScript. So because it allows your page to get information from somewhere else. And that somewhere else could be a file inside your project, like, for example, that data.json, or it could be from the internet, or like an API. And the idea behind Fetch is very simple. Once you understand the pattern, you can use it in almost any project. So here's the easiest way to think about what Fetch does. You ask for some data, you wait for the response, and then you do something with that data. So it's really just a conversation between the page and wherever the information is stored. For example, your JavaScript might say, hey, please give me the product details from this file. Then it waits. Once the file responds, your page receives the data and you can choose what to do with it, like show it on the big screen or just log it in the console or wherever. So this simple flow helps your site feel alive because the content can change based on real information rather than you typing everything directly into the HTML, which is called like hard coding everything into the HTML. So the small code example shown on the slide is all you need to get started. So we have, it may look short, but it is doing a lot already. So the first line asks for the data from the file called data.json. The next line converts that data into a usable format. And the last line there just shows that data in the console so you can make sure everything is working. So often beginners feel that the fetch is too advanced because they see longer examples online. But the truth is, fetch becomes easier when you think of it as just a conversation. So you make a request, like I said, you get a reply, and then you choose what to do with the reply. And that's really it, right? At this stage, you do not need to worry about advanced fetch patterns like error handling, async and await, or working with large APIs. So those things will come naturally as you grow. For now, understanding the basic flow is more than enough, and it already opens the door to more interactive and dynamic front-end projects. So next, we'll look at how this simple fetch pattern fits into a full small project and how it helps bring your components to life. So this is the clean, beginner-friendly project structure we would use for the mini projects. So I want you to take a moment and really notice how simple it is. Even though the project gives a nice modern result, everything is built from just a few clear paths inside one main folder called the product gallery. And inside that folder, we have a small set of files, index.html, style.css, script.js, data.json, and then an image folder, which holds our products pictures. So let's walk through what each of these actually does. First, we have the index.html. Think of this as the main page and the heart of the project. This is where all the structure page lives, things like the header, the section that will hold the product card, and the overall layout that the user sees. So whenever the browser loads this page, this is the first file it will usually read. Okay, so next is our style.css, which controls the design. So all the colors, spacing, fonts, and visual design are kept here. If you want to change how the page looks, this is the file you go to. Keeping all the styling in one place makes it much easier to adjust and improve the design without touching the structure or the logic. Right. So then we have the script.js, which handles the behavior. So this is where we write the JavaScript that loads data, creates the product cards on the page, and responds when someone clicks a button. So all of the interactive parts of the project are handled here, which keeps the HTML clean and focused on structure only, right? So after that, we have the data.json. So this file holds the product information, such as name, price, description, tag, and which image to use. So instead of encoding all the product details directly into HTML, we store them in this data file and we let JavaScript load them to the page. So this is a very common pattern in front-end projects, and it keeps things really flexible. So if you want to change a product name or price, all you just need to do is update the data.json, right? So finally, we have the images folder. Inside it, we have files like the product one, product two, and product three. So these are the pictures that appear on each product card. Keeping all images inside one dedicated folder keeps the project tidy and makes it easy to swap or add new images later on. So this structure may look simple, but it is very powerful. And when your folder is organized like this, it becomes much easier to grow this project, fix issues, and understand what each part does at a glance. So beginners often make the mistake of putting everything into a single file, but splitting it into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, data, and images gives you clarity and control. So this is the kind of layout that even experienced developers use when it comes to a quick prototype. So again, it is clean, easy, and a great foundation for building more advanced projects in the future. So on the next slide, we'll look at what this structure produces and when everything is connected, how the final output looks in the browser. So here, this is what the mini project looks like when everything comes together. So you can now see the final output that is created using this simple folder structure that we've just walked through. So even though the files themselves were clean and minimal, the result looks polished, organized, and something a beginner can be proud of. So at the very top of the page, we have a simple header with the project title. It helps set the tone for the entire layout. And because styling is clean, the header feels modern without being complicated. So right below the header is our main section, which gives a grid of product cards. The grid automatically arranges the cards neatly depending on the screen size. So the layout looks good whether you are on a laptop or on a small device like a mobile phone. So each card in this grid includes several important parts. So there's a picture at the top which is pulled from our images folder. Below the picture, we have a small label or tag such as new or popular. So this helps add context and makes the card visually interesting. And then we have the product name, the price, and a short description. So all of this gives the card enough information without overwhelming the viewer. And at the bottom of each card, there's a button. So when you click that button, it responds specifically to the product you selected. So even though the layout looks simple, there's real interaction happening behind the scenes. So this is where JavaScript steps in by loading the data from data.json and creating each card dynamically. And what's really nice about this project is that everything you see here is created using the exact three tools that we've discussed. HTML provides the structure, CSS controls the appearance, JavaScript handles the loading of data and the interactivity. So you're seeing a full working example of all three coming together in a clean and organized way. So this output is a great example of what beginners can achieve with simple, clean code. So you don't need complex frameworks or advanced tools to build something like this. The goal is to create something complicated. The goal is not to create something complicated, but to focus on clear structure, good organization, and understanding how the pieces work together themselves. So once you can build a layout like this, you have the foundation to create many other kinds of front-end projects, from simple galleries like this one, all the way to more advanced dashboards, portfolios, or small applications. So this kind of project is a perfect stepping stone because it builds your confidence while keeping everything understandable and manageable. So next, we will look at some common mistakes beginners make and how this clean approach helps you to avoid them. So most beginners make the same mistakes when they start building front-end projects, and this is completely normal. So it happens because learning something new can feel exciting and sometimes a bit overwhelming. So people rush into writing code without thinking about structure or organization. So I mean, the good news is that these mistakes are very easy to understand and even easier to fix once you know what you're looking out for. So one of the common mistakes is putting everything into one file. A beginner might write their HTML, their CSS, and their JavaScript all in the same document because it feels faster or more convenient at that moment. But as soon as the project grows even a little bit, that file becomes confusing and difficult to work with. So you end up scrolling back and forth, trying to figure out what belongs where, what's happening where, and then you're confused, basically. So it's not really the best practice. So another mistake is repeating code, especially in HTML and CSS. For example, instead of using one clean card structure, beginners sometimes copy and paste the same block over and over, making it harder to update later. As of, if you have the same block of code that you've copied over and over, so if you need to make one single update or you need to make a change of something, you would then have to update all of them individually, right? So a third common mistake is mixing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together. So this happens when styling is added directly inside the HTML or when JavaScript is scattered throughout the page. Mixing everything together like this makes your project really messy, and it becomes much harder to understand what's going on. When each tool stays in its own place, your project becomes clearer and much easier to maintain. Right. So another thing beginners do is use random names for classes, IDs, or functions. So names like box one, test, thing, or new two don't mean anything. And when you come back later, you won't remember what you're supposed to do, what they were supposed to do. So clear naming is one of the simplest ways to improve your code instantly because it makes your file readable at a glance. And finally, many beginners rely on heavy inline CSS, writing style attribute directly into the HTML tag. And this might seem convenient at first, but it becomes messy and almost impossible to manage as your design gets more detailed. Right. So keep all your styling in style.css. That's a good habit and will save you a lot of time and stress. So the most important thing to remember is that none of these mistakes mean you're doing badly. They simply mean you are moving too fast and haven't learned the clean habits yet. Every developer has gone through this stage, including professionals. So and the great thing is every single one of these mistakes can be fixed with a simple habit, which is exactly what we're building throughout this session. So up next, we'll be talking about what those helpful habits look like and how you can use them to keep your projects clean and organized from the very beginning. So here are some easy habits that will make your projects much cleaner and more enjoyable to work on. These habits are simple, beginner friendly, and can improve your code immediately. Even if you're just starting out, they are also the same habits used by experienced developers. So building them early gives you a strong foundation. So the first habit is, starting your project tidy. Before you write any single line of code, set up a clean folder structure. Have your HTML file, your CSS, and your JavaScript and your images folder ready. And when you start with an organized layout, everything you add later falls naturally into place. And it removes the confusion and helps you think clearly as the project grows. The second habit is separating your files. HTML for structure, CSS for appearance, JavaScript for behavior. This is a very simple rule, but it keeps your projects clean and maintainable, easy to maintain. When you know exactly where something belongs, you avoid mixing things together and you always know how to make changes. So separate your file and make it easy for you and others to understand. Another helpful habit is use simple class names. So choosing names that clearly describe what the element is or what it does. Names like card, title, button, container, make your code readable and easy to follow. So you don't need complicated names or long phrases. Simple names keep your HTML and CSS clean and they make your project feel more professional. Right. So next is keeping your functions small. In JavaScript, a function should do one thing and do it well. So small functions are easier to understand and easier to debug and easier to reuse. So when a function gets too long or tries to do too many things altogether, it becomes confusing and harder to control. So breaking your logic into smaller, clear pieces is an habit that will help you as your projects become more advanced. So another habit is sticking to one style, whether it's spacing, styling, naming, formatting, try to stay consistent throughout your project. Consistency makes your code look clean and make your life easier. It also helps your project feel more organized and predictable, which reduces mistakes. So finally, remember that a good code does not need to be complicated. Clean code is not about writing the most advanced solution. It is about writing something that is clear and easy to understand. So simple code is often the best code, but because you can build on it, change it, fix it, and grow it without getting overwhelmed. So by practicing these small habits, your projects will naturally become more organized, easier to maintain, more enjoyable to work on. And these are the habits that separate confident beginners from frustrated beginners. So now we'll bring everything together with a final summary of the key ideas from today's session. Right. To wrap up today's session, here are the key points I want you to remember. These ideas may seem simple, but they are the foundation of clean, confident front-end development, especially when you're just getting started. So the first is HTML is for structure. This is the skeleton of your project. So it tells the browser what is on your page and how everything is arranged. So if your HTML is clean, the rest of your project becomes easier and everything will follow basically. So next, CSS is for design. This is where all the colors, spacing, layouts, and visual style will come from. So keeping your CSS in its own file and using clear class names make your design clean and easy to maintain. So good styling doesn't rely on complexity. It relies on clarity and consistency. So then we have JavaScript, which is for actions and behavior. So JavaScript is what makes your page interactive. It adds live to your project by loading data, responding to clicks, and updating your screen. So when your JavaScript is organized and kept separate from your HTML and CSS, everything feels smoother and more controlled. So a big theme we'll cover today is the importance of keeping everything separate and clean. So when each part of your project does its own job, you avoid confusion and your code becomes much easier to understand. And this separation also makes it easier to fix problems, add new features, improve your design without breaking anything else. So another important reminder is to build in small pieces. You do not need to create everything at once. Focus on one part at a time, make a small component, get it working, and then move to the next one. Working in small steps helps you stay organized and it reduces the chance of feeling overwhelmed. So if you follow these steps consistently, your project will not only become easier to build, but also more enjoyable. And you'll feel more in control, more confident, and more aware of how everything fits together. So front-end development becomes much less stressful when you build from clean foundation. So as you continue practicing, keep those ideas in mind, start simple, stay organized, and focus on clarity. These habits will carry you far, whether you stay with simple projects or move into more advanced front-end work, right? So thank you for joining me in this beginner-friendly walkthrough of building clean and simple front-end projects. And I hope this session has helped you to see how front-end development doesn't have to be overwhelming. So with the right structure, a tidy folder, and a clear understanding of how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript work together, you can build projects that are organized, modern, and easy to maintain. So whether you're just starting out or you've been learning for a while, that small clean step lead to bigger skills. And try and focus on clarity, take your time, and keep practicing. Everything gets easier the more you build. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you continue exploring and creating the confidence that you deserve. Thank you.